So, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word control in Agile? It's probably not good. Things like informal interactions and conversations are preferred to formally managing lists of tasks. But just to dispel any fears there, control theory sounds fancy, but it is absolutely not micromanagement. It's about keeping a system stable while things change, which, if you think about it, it's exactly what we do in every sprint. So consider the agile value of responding to change over following a plan. Changing circumstances are inevitable, and the more predictable we can be in response to those, the more likely we can safely make the most of all the other good stuff that an agile approach offers. My personal motivation for giving this talk is that I'm now working in a broad role encompassing technical architecture, product development, and also acting as a Scrum Master, which I summarise as empowering a team to deliver value. A long time ago at university, I studied control systems, and I recently revisited some of those concepts in my work. And it occurred to me that the principles of control theory that keep thermostats accurate and cars stable seem to be very aligned to the processes around empowering agile teams. And I'd like to explore those further in the rest of my talk. So, ever wonder why your latte doesn't leap out of the cup each time you hit a pothole while you're driving along a road? That's the suspension team in your car. Think of that team as three co-workers who keep the car on the road and civilized. Start off with you have springs. They're the pullback component. They yank the wheel and body back to its home position after every bump. Secondly, you have dampers, the smoothing component. These soak up the energy so the car doesn't bounce forever, converts boing boing into nothing. And finally, you have mass, the stuff you're hauling around. The heavier the car, or if you've got holiday luggage, the harder the springs and the dampers have to work. So springs haul the car back to balance, dampers hush the drama, and mass decides how hard they have to work. And if you tweak these three components, you can build anything from a softly riding limo to a Formula One racing car. So when I was putting the talk together and asked for an image of a damper, the first thing it gave me was that. So basically you've got here a spring and a damper together, which brings up a very good point. You don't normally have one in isolation. You've got combinations of many springs and many dampers to get a smooth ride. You can combine components to respond to change in sophisticated ways and fine-tune them. I'm going to show you a graph now. Don't worry too much. There's only one graph in this presentation and you don't need to understand all the numbers on it. This shows how different spring and damper combinations behave in different ways. Ignore the numbers. The key thing is you've got the 0.2 trace, which is quick and bouncy, and the 0.8 trace, which is a lot slower but a lot calmer. And you can control those traces, and neither's necessarily better all the time, and you can choose these for your circumstances. So you might ask, why am I talking to you about all of this at an Agile meetup? They've got equivalents in most Agile approaches. Springs, our pullback role that pull things back to normality, are very closely aligned to sprint planning, a definition of done, or team goals. These also pull things back, projects back to normality, and can be seen as the equivalent of springs. Similar to springs, you can tune them. You can, for example, you can tune sprint planning to have looser capacity limits, which is like softening the spring, which gives you faster change, but perhaps more replanning mid-sprint. Dampers, our smoothing role, absorb shocks. In Agile, we also have a smoothing role. This is typically retrospectives. Again, you can tune these. You can maybe have weekly mini retros instead of fortnightly, which will have fewer carryover defects. And if you don't bother with retros altogether or do them poorly, then your smoothing won't be particularly effective. And going back to the previous graph, you'll have lots of bouncing around. Finally, mass, the stuff we're carrying, causes trouble. Mass is like the project size or perhaps technical debt at the size of the backlog, which makes the other components have to work harder. Sometimes you might have opportunities to tune this. You might, not everyone will, but you might be in a position to split an 8-person team into 2 4-person teams, which could result in shorter cycle time and faster decisions. But with all 3 of these, you can adjust the tuning to your circumstances. If you're, for example, in a startup, you might not mind bouncing around particularly much in the face of changing circumstances, and it might be a positive. However, if you're in a safety critical or a regulated environment, you'll prefer to respond more gradually. When I introduced Agile to my current organisation, one of the motivations for doing this was that we were changing too quickly, and the retrospectives helped smooth those changes. And at other times in our journey, I felt we've been ignoring important possibilities, and allowing a bit more flexibility in sprint planning has helped us react to those more rapidly. Sometimes I reflect on how I can improve, and one of the things when I reflect on Agile is answering the question, am I doing this Agile stuff in the right way? I go back to the core Agile values. I've regularly heard, for example, someone talk about something or heard a tool vendor describe their product, and I thought then that it introduces too much process rather than trust interactions between people. So I like to go back to the Agile values. I'm sure everyone's seen these before, but the important ones here, the last of these is responding to change over following a plan. And the first of these is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. I had a concern here that am I introducing process rather than relying on interactions? On balance, I think that learning from control theory allows us to change the manner of our interactions and respond to change in a known way, which will hopefully deliver us more value. And there'd be some types of work where this might allow agile over more plan-driven methods to be used and allow conversations to take preference over Gantt charts. I talked about the mechanical systems of springs and dampers, mainly because I felt those would be easier for general audience to relate to. I could have equally well talked about electrical systems. The maths here are essentially the same. Replace the mass with an inductor, the damper by a resistor, and the spring with a capacitor, and use the same equations. It's also the same for thermal systems. Replace a mass with something that stores heat, like a house, and a damper with thermal resistance, like loft insulation. The maths is well established and understood. Engineers have the equations for this. In principle, you could use the same maths for agile systems, but don't worry. If you see an equation and panic, the intuition is what's important here, not the calculus. You can use it, and tools exist to help you if you want to go down that road, but you don't need to. It's understandable for someone without an engineering background. So, how do we use these principles in practice? So firstly, could you spot the bounce when responding to a change? Are you bouncing too much or responding too quickly? Do you run around excitedly and change everything when the sales team come up with a new idea, or note and ignore it, or steadily and adapt and understand and how it gains traction? 2, could you decide to change the spring, the damper, or the mass? Some things are in your sphere of control and some aren't. Too often here we moan about what we can't do rather than change what you can. Change what you can change, don't complain about what you can't. B, could you then nudge one of those and measure its effect? Remember, if it doesn't work, you can respond quickly and change something else. You're not making a costly permanent change here. Finally, could you rinse and repeat this? Reflection is key to Agile, and think about whether the change is helping you predictably deliver value. If changes to sprint planning and retrospectives don't work for you, think about how other parts of the process absorb shocks or pull things back to normality and change those instead. So, to end with, I'd like to invite you to think about one place your team is bouncing around or responding too slowly today, and which knob you could choose to test adjusting in the next sprint.